Hi, I'm Cathy Davis, and I'm here today joined by Pete Carlson, and we are going to have a conversation today because as a church we've been talking about grief and how to walk through it, and we've been sitting there together, and all of us have had all these different stories about what we've walked through individually or what we've walked through with our families, and some that have been defined by huge loss and some that's been defined in a different way. And God is showing up. And we just want to stop for a second, take a moment, and tell a story. So Pete was very generous in saying, I walked through something that I'm willing to kind of put out there and share so that people can see Jesus through it. So today we're going to have that conversation. So thanks, Pete, for being willing to do that.
Yeah, you bet.
So first of all, tell us who you are.
My role here at Hopevale is the creative media pastor. So we've been here, I think now we're coming up on 9 years, I believe. So,
Wow.
My wife Jean and I, we've been married coming up on 19 years. My son Josh is 14. I'm going to be a freshman in high school next year. So.
Okay, so Pete, we're going to have a conversation about something that happened some years ago, 5 years ago.
Yep.
Can you just kind of tell us the facts of what happened?
Yeah, my son was 9 years old at the time, and he was doing hockey, and I was a hockey coach, kind of assisting with kind of teaching kids how to skate and all that kind of stuff. And this was at the Midland Ice Hockey Arena. And we were done with practice, and I was on one end of the hockey rink, and I skated as fast as I could from one side to the other. And near the entrance where you get out, I went to stop. And I went airborne, and I T-boned the boards. And my right leg took the brunt of it, and my ankle shattered, my leg broke in a couple of places. Yeah, I messed up my leg pretty bad. So, and the first thought that rang through my head real quick was, I don't have time for this.
Oh, okay.
This can't happen right now. There was a lot going on in our life, and my son was right there.
Right.
So from there, Midland Hospital,
the ambulance comes.
Yeah.
And you're just like flat on the ice, not knowing exactly what happened.
Yeah. I tried to walk, and I actually ended up crawling off the ice because, again, I was thinking in my head, I don't have time for this.
Right.
So I wanted it to kind of go away. But yeah, as soon as I tried to stand, that was a bad decision.
Yeah.
So, yep.
So they haul you to Midland Hospital.
Yes.
And then the snowball just started to roll, right?
He said this was pretty bad, so they called in a specialist from Beaumont. He came in, did the surgery, 18 screws, 2 plates, all sorts of stuff. But when I came out of surgery, the first surgery, my leg was on fire. Yeah. So I was in a lot of pain, and they're like, oh, you have compartment syndrome is what they ended up calling it. So they put me back under, and they kind of fillet your leg, for lack of a better medical term, to relieve the pressure. And after that, came out of surgery, was at the Midland Hospital for a couple of days. And then there was some concern about infection. So the doctor who was in Beaumont said, hey, I want you to come out to Beaumont where our team is so we can watch over you.
Right.
And from there, we had 9 more surgeries. And in that process, I had kidney failure. I had 2 blood transfusions. And I had press, which is, I guess, pressure on the back of the brain. So I lost my vision for a day or 2.
So, I mean, how you have an accident at the hockey arena in Midland, and you're thinking, this isn't good, I don't have time for this. And how long did you end up being in the hospital between Midland and Detroit?
Yeah, so around a month and a half, or maybe a little bit less than a month and a half, but it felt like a pretty long time.
Yeah.
So, and again, Beaumont's like 2 hours away, so yeah.
Like, give us some of the emotions that were surrounding that 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
I can tell you, I could feel people were praying for me.
Really?
I felt strong when I felt like I shouldn't have been. I shouldn't have been a disaster. I feel like I should have been a disaster, but I did feel, I think, in that God's presence there, and just knowing that, you're going to get through, and then just kind of thinking through, how is God going to use this? But those were in the sobriety moments. A lot of the time I was underneath a lot of powerful drugs. I definitely feel like God was there, and I was listening to the Bible on headphones, I think a lot of times, just to bring a calm and a peace through that. But thinking back on it, a lot of it was a blur.
So you get to the end of those 6 weeks and the doctors at Beaumont say, okay, you're all better now. Looks good. We're just going to send you home and, have fun running your next marathon. Or what did they say?
Yeah, so the prognosis at that time was you're going to have constant pain, and there will come a point where you can't manage the pain anymore. And at that time, we might look at fusing the ankle or doing something different. But they wanted to give me, I think, as much mobility as possible. But, skating was no longer going to be a thing. Running is not an option. Jumping, and that kind of activity is no longer going to be a thing. So that was kind of hard at first. I don't think I believed it. I'm like, yeah, that's what you say.
Oh, I see.
So, but my wife was really good too. She wasn't going to let me push things, and re-injure it, and that sort of stuff. So, but that was kind of a wake-up call, I think, a little bit, to realize I was not going to be the same person I was before the accident.
And so your first response to that was, maybe they'll be wrong. I can prove them wrong. It's not going to be as bad as they say.
Yeah. Yep.
But then after that, was there kind of a coming to terms with, maybe my life really is going to be different because of one incident that happened at the Midland Hockey Arena on some random afternoon at my kids' hockey practice? My life is going to forever look different moving forward.
Yeah.
Do you remember when that hit you, or was that kind of like a slow?
I think it was slow. It was kind of a gradual thing because I wanted to push the limits a little bit on that. But during the rehab process and stuff like that, you start to realize, okay, this isn't going to be what it was. And I think at that stage and at that point, it was realizing, okay, this isn't going to get, back to normal. You learn to live with, I think, the pain and that kind of stuff. But it's just a constant reminder that it's there. So because of that accident, even today, 5 years later, you're still dealing with pain, and you're still dealing with the fact that you have limited use of that leg, right? Yeah.
And so it wasn't just like I dealt with trauma, I grieved that I might have lost 6 weeks or 6 months of PT. There was this ongoing thing that you kind of had to come to terms with. That was just kind of a slow step-by-step thing. Do you remember, was there a dark part of that versus I'm listening to Bible on my headphones and it's all good and I could tell people were praying for me, versus the other side of that? When did that happen?
So the painkillers and stuff that you're on, how that impacted me, I think that made me a little bit happier.
Okay.
So, but I think when we started weaning me off the pain medication, I think that's when I got to my darkest point, and I actually started feeling depression. And I'd never really gone through that before. Always heard about it, and things like that, but I think it was during that stage that it was just kind of like, okay, like the impact of realizing you're not going to be who you were, the drugs starting to wear off, the fact that every day you're waking up, with pain and, all of that kind of stuff. And then coming to realize, like, there are things that I had planned to do with my son later in life, that's not going to be the same. That kind of all came to a head, I think, for a season. And I loved how Dan talked about, people's, at least it wasn't this, or the comparison game and stuff like that. And I think I was doing that to myself a little bit, like, okay, at least you didn't lose your leg, because that could have been potentially
Let's look on the bright side.
Right, yep.
Was that helpful?
Yes and no, I think. I think sometimes I tried to convince myself, like, suck it up, right? Like, it could have been worse. You could have lost your leg. It was interesting, and I think part of that process of going through that, where I felt maybe the most, down. Volleyball for me has always been my outlet, and brought me joy in life. I played in college. I played for a couple of years where I had hoped, or I made an attempt to maybe go amateur pro, kind of thing. So, but that was one of those things, like, I always felt I was going to have my whole life, and I was looking forward to maybe doing that with my son Josh and playing tournaments and stuff. So even to this day, when I watch, like, college volleyball and things of that nature, that still kind of hurts.
Right.
It brings back some of that stuff. But there was a passage in Scripture that kind of played over and over again in my head, in Romans, that it talks about no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has even conceived of what God has in store for those who love him. And I know this life is a vapor, it's a mist, right? So you got all this head knowledge, and I'm like, okay, Pastor Pete, now it's real. Like, how are you going to apply that, to your life? And I have. And that does kind of give you hope through all this, realizing this is not a permanent situation. It is here on this earth, but this earth isn't all there is.
Right.
So I kind of know no matter what comes in life, I know God says he's always going to be there with me. And I feel like he was, during that time, and even is to this day. Like, there are moments where, you kind of feel pretty down or hurt or, I wish I could do that again. But realizing one day I will.
Right.
That helps. That helps immensely.
Yeah, so when you say that your life is different now than it was before the accident, because things that you were important to your identity and your joy in this life, volleyball or other extreme sports, and were part of you. It wasn't just like, oh, gee, I can't hopscotch anymore. I mean, it was something that was super important to you. And now, and the way you had scripted your life moving forward was different. Yeah. And you had to adjust to that. Is that how it felt?
It takes a while to get there, but kind of. Yeah. There's days when you do get frustrated and you do get angry. And I know for me, like, I look back on that and I'm like, okay, obviously, what could have I done differently, right? So, and one of those things is like, if I had just sharpened my skates,
so you replay it. Yeah,
you kind of replay the situation in your head and you hope, what could I have done to have prevented that, or what mistakes did I make? Or again, I appreciate kind of Dan's message, because your mind does go there. Like, what did I do to deserve this? Or did God do, did I do something? And I have a little bit of a different take on that, because I feel like if God was going to judge me for the things I've done, it would be way worse. I deserve so much worse. So the hope that knowing that God died on the cross for my sins and has taken that from me, I realize he's not punishing me now. Yeah. I think knowing all of that, and I battle this all the time because I love comfort. I love being comfortable. Like, if I could hang out in a hot tub every day after work and all the things, right? Yeah. But that's not what God has called us to here on this earth. So, and this earth is not our home. So, but sometimes you forget. Sometimes you want a little bit of heaven here on earth. And I think you get that. I think God does that throughout our lives. But comfort is not the gauge for whether or not you're doing God's will or not. Sometimes God's will is for the pain.
So Pete, I feel like in this grief series that we've talked about at Hopevale, Dan gave us some questions to think about when we're walking through our own grief. And one of them is ask the questions, express the emotions, seek the Lord. So did you have a season where you asked some questions of the Lord that may have felt a little bit like, I can't believe I'm saying this, or?
Honestly, for me, I didn't go through the where are you? Okay. And that's why I feel like I really felt like people were praying for me during that season, because I didn't feel like I was going there. I did feel like he was with me. So, and I hope that wasn't the drugs, but I don't know. There was just comfort, I think, through knowing those promises. So it really was kind of relying on those. But, were there days where I was like, why? Like, why do we have to go through these kinds of things? And even to this day, I'm like, even with what's going on in the world or whatever, I'm like, okay, Jesus, I'm ready. You can come back now. And now it wasn't just kind of the pat answers that you give to people going through it. You're actually going through it yourself. And like I said before, it's like, okay, are you real? Yes. Or are you not? Was this all just a thing, or are you actually going to apply it? And I think that was a challenge for me during this season. So
5 years later, what helps you now? Is it helpful if everyone just moves on? Yeah. Or is it helpful for you if someone close to you goes, how are you doing with that? To people that really care about you, what advice would you give us in that?
That's a great question. There are days and there are relationships where I appreciate that question, because there are days when it's not looking good. And I think people see me, they see me limping, right? And then other times I'm not limping. And that's just the process. Like if I sit too long, it swells up and I've got to work it out and all that kind of stuff. And it depends on when you see me that you're like, hey, are you doing okay? And it's like, yeah, I'm doing okay. This is just part of my life now. But people who know me well, you know, I might go there at times like, yeah, it's been a little bit of a rough week, you know, and there's not really much you can say or do about that. You appreciate people's concern.
It's interesting. I find that life would be easier if we could go through a trauma, do whatever God asks us to do in it,
Yeah.
then tie it up with a bow,
Yeah.
put it behind us,
Yep.
and face what's next.
Yeah.
But I've found, as I've talked with other people and talked to you as well, that it's never tied up with a bow.
Yes.
And I think God may do that because his goal isn't to just bring us through trauma. His goal is for us to know him better.
Yeah.
And so in the middle of hard, in the middle of loss, in the middle of plan B or C or D, God wants to show that he's going to be with us in that.
Probably the biggest eye-opening and most humbling experience of all of this is when you're used to being the giver, it's very hard to receive. So, and this forced me to receive. And I can't tell you how thankful our family was for all the people that stepped up. Our community group showed up in big ways. Our neighbors showed up in big ways. My family showed up in big ways. All the people that cared about us, from, you know, providing food to visiting to taking care of our lawn, like it went well beyond just the hospital. You know, coming home, I was bedridden for quite some time before we could even start, you know, things.
There's so many things I feel like I wish we could talk more about. And I, as you alluded to with Gene and Josh, I feel like when a trauma happens to an individual, there are other people that are close in your circle that feel it. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yep.
Yeah, thanks for being willing to share. And I feel like what God is going to do in this is open up conversations. I appreciated you sharing about how meaningful it was that people rallied around you when you were in the hospital, but then outside the hospital. And there were people that didn't do things that you even knew that were, like you said, praying that you will never know about. But that's what church is, right? We love each other and we are connected. And so the fact that you had built some of those relationships ahead of time, for those of you that wonder, why do I even go to church to begin with? Why do I show up at this community group? Why am I friends with my neighbor? Because you never know what kind of support we may need just after a hockey practice one day.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yep.
And those relationships matter. God uses those to minister to us. So thank you for sharing that with us. So thanks, Hopevale, for listening in on this conversation and trusting that God is going to use Pete's story to encourage us to love each other well, to ask God the questions that we know he can handle, and to walk us through whatever grief that he's called us to walk through. So thanks, Hopevale.